Davidová.
And I am Dermott McMeel.
We will be talking about co-designing with blockchain for a project called Synergetic Landscape. It is a work in progress project that is synergizing our two approaches. My approach called Systemic Approach to Architectural Performance and Dermott's approach of rethinking blockchain. So to introduce systemic approach to architectural performance, it is a fusion of several process-based fields, integrating systems-oriented design methodology, performance-oriented architecture, ecosystemic urban interventions, time-based design, non-anthropocentric ecosystemic services. And what we will be talking a lot about is co-design, co-creation, and DIY. So those things are multi-centered, co-created, and actually generative. Let's get to systemic approach to architectural performance. It is focusing on landscape, social and cultural ecology in built environment for co-living performance. And it aims for transition towards post-Anthropocene in built environment, which is searching for synergy of larger biodiversity and climate change adaptation. It is approaching it through architectural and urban design with holistic approach and through something I call real-life co-design laboratory. Real-life co-design laboratory means that as opposed to traditional laboratory like a reductionist laboratory where you would separate everything and test one thing without relations, we intervene into real life and test things through real life within the complexity of real life and within the interaction through real life. That's why they get co-designed and redesigned through real life. If I get to this slide, this is a picture from Cardiff, nearby our World School of Architecture. And you see what everything goes wrong here. You have this beautiful park, very, very nice natural reserve. Then you have sharp fence. Nothing can penetrate through that, or almost nothing can penetrate through that. Then you have motorway. Then to make sure you make even one more wall. And then you have human dwellings. What is the Synergetic Landscapes project trying to aim for is actually co-living across multiple species and things and people together.
Okay, so why are we interested in blockchain within this context? Well, if we were to generalize, we would say that society and civilization in general has kind of favored one of two ways of organizing itself historically, and that's centralized or decentralized systems. And the people, and it's always people at particular nodes in these systems, have incredible amounts of power. And the more complex a system gets, and the more central those nodes are, the more power they have, and they're susceptible to corruption. Think of banking, for example, is a reasonably good example for what we're talking about. What blockchain starts to offer, and it's probably best conceptualized through Bitcoin, which is a system that does not require people, but allows for the transfers of funds and money, and we can place trust within the blockchain system on which it's built. So this really offers us two potential things within this context. It reduces the power of a particular node or a particular person or thing at that node, and it also requires a consensus in the system. Now, in what we're looking at here, we're looking at the possibility that within this sort of distributed system, not only will people be active, but the potential for other things and other parts of our ecology and our landscape and our built environment can start to operate within this landscape. And we will talk about that in a few moments. So if you go to the next slide, this is a river. This is a river in New Zealand called the Wanganui, and it has been given the same rights as a person. So this starts to shift things. This is starting to have a thing that now starts to have rights, as opposed to just be a thing, a resource to be mined or fished or what. So this is an important change to where things sit within our societal system. And on the next slide, we're going to see a Labour pledge from the election from 2018, where Labour were talking about loans sitting with properties and not residents. This is also significant. This is this idea that a house all of a sudden can have money. It can have a wallet. It can potentially have buying power. So this concept of these things within our environment starting to take on particular points on that diagram, on those nodes, and having agency within the system to be part of that system and to be traded with. And the next slide starts to unpack a little bit about what the possibility of that is. This is a diagram by Stefan Michel, who talks about value constellations, where value is created from a constellation of things being connected. That might be a person, that might be a material, that might be a manufacturing technique. And out of those three things, a thing of value gets created. What we hypothesize within this is that within our environment and our landscape, other things start to become parts of this diagram, the river, the house, and that new opportunities are going to be presented for value but in combination and co-creation with these other things within our environment. Okay, Maria, back to you.
Yes, when we get to co-creation, we are using methodologies through systems-oriented design and through systemic approach to architectural performance. So to start with co-creation, actually you have to start first mapping what is your own universe, what is your agenda and agency. You would have multiple stakeholders mapping their own interests, or stakeholders, or even team of experts, like for instance dendrologist talks on behalf of the tree, and those would create their own minimaps, their own vision within the project. And then what you get into is giga mapping. Giga mapping is relating those agendas and agencies amongst multiple stakeholders, finding relations and finding synergies. How could actually be different stakeholders with different agencies together within flourishing community? Then you try to synergize this within design proposal, that you prototype, full-scale prototype in real life, and through testing the full-scale prototype to real life, you actually get a lot of interaction through real life environment, realize that not everything works as you imagined or planned for, or that you might not be even happy with your original agendas. So there comes the reflective part, and within this reflective part, you get back to the real life laboratory and redesign your proposal. So this is a process-based field that is all the time performing in real life, and that is generative. If I get to this gigamap, this is one of my students actually synergizing different minimaps together, finding relationships and interpreting relationships between different agendas, trying to find synergy across multiple team. This would be example of the prototype. I will get to that later. So we would be designing prototypical interventions that would support ecosystem. For instance, increasing different species habitats or edible landscapes that would be integrating human systems as well. This is an example from Codesign workshop, where if you, for instance, reproduce our prototypical design intervention, the cafe owner offers to give you coffee because you would actually make his cafe more attractive. Therefore, you generate a profit for him, and therefore you can earn tokens. If you work with beehives, maybe bees can get tokens for actually pollinating your tomato, which means that if you invest into that beehive who pollinate your tomatoes, you can expand the pollinators garden, which means you have stronger bees, so you earn from that, from your tomato. In the same time, you support the community of bees, and therefore you generate coexisting, flourishing community. That would be also, we would be relating those prototypical interventions to tangible objects that would support this ecosystem and generating emotions and empathy across different stakeholders who would be motivated to DIY those prototypes in their front and back gardens, which means increasing ecosystem. So this would be a gigamap of the scenario of one of my students who is integrating this research on how the blockchain system could work within that, and lower down is his prototypical intervention that would be generative, and how that one gets integrated in this blockchain system.
Okay, I'm going to just unpack a couple of things that Maria talked about there. In the top right quadrant there, you can see a little icon of a coffee machine. And this is some of our friends and colleagues at the Design Informatics Centre at the University of Edinburgh have hacked a Bitcoin wallet onto a coffee machine, where you need to transfer money to the coffee machine in order to get a coffee. And then the coffee machine can actually pay you for topping up the coffee beans, for example. So this is where a thing that we talked about, a thing starts to have real agency in a system now. It's not just a coffee machine that's part of a system where you're paying a corporation. You're actually paying the coffee machine, and the coffee machine then starts to trade for coffee beans. So it takes on a much more important part of the overall coffee ecology. So moving to the next slide, Maria also talked about bees. Bees are really, really important, but they have very little agency within our environment, do they? You know, we sort of use them for the cultivation of honey, but we know that there's risks around bees as well, and bees are at risk. But what if bees could take on a more important role in the economy? What if it could have agency within our sort of environmental or our social systems? And this is a project that sort of explores that, where with a hive, for example, having a cryptocurrency wallet, all of a sudden you have to pay the hive for the honey in order to produce it. But also the hive can now pay people for maintaining gardens and for planting flowers. So the hive starts to have a lot more agency within the environment, and it starts to elevate them within that sort of co-creation system into a more important and a more sustainable sort of position, because they now start to have agency and power and rights within that overall system. Maria, back to you.
Yes, then we get to this beautiful diagram that shows the multi-centered design. So we are moving from user-centered design to multi-centered design that integrates the ecosystem, the co-living processes across the species, the co-working with neighbors together, and the generative agency of people DIY reproducing those prototypes and expanding those prototypes. So you make one ecosystemic intervention that is perhaps one small single object, but that object is generative and having generative agenda in the environment. So when I get to this slide, as I said, it's a work in progress project. So at this moment, I will get to our blog. We are just releasing the recipes for DIY, so people reproduce the design for extending habitats of different species, and we motivate the local community to reproduce them in their front and back gardens. So these are just few examples of the projects. And when I get back, please feel free to scan this QR code, because that goes to the blog. And please follow us on blog and try to reproduce one of our prototypes in your front or back garden. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.